This is for me. I call this meeting to order. So welcome, everyone, to meeting number 41 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. We will start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Pursuant to the order of reference of Thursday, June 23rd, 2022, the committee resumed consideration of Bill C-21, an act to amend certain acts and to make certain consequential amendments firearms. Today we have two panels, and for the first hour we have by video conference, we have as an individual, Lieutenant Colonel retired John Schneiderbanger, and from the Alberta Mounted Shooters Association, Julie Saretsky, President. And we have back again with the Coalition for Gun Control, Dr. Wendy Colquier, President. So we will give each group up to 5 minutes for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with questions. So we'll start with Lieutenant Colonel Schneiderbanger. 5 minutes, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to appear as a witness in regards to the review of Bill C-21. I am Lieutenant Colonel John Schneiderbanger. I'm a retired officer who served 30 years in the Canadian Armed Forces. Prior to retirement, I was the base commander of Canadian Forces Base Shiloh. I have been a firearms owner for 40 years and a competitive sport shooter for 30 years, having competed in various shooting disciplines with handgun, rifle, and shotgun. I currently compete in 3-gun and International Practical Shooting Confederation, or IPSC. I am an IPSC Canada national instructor and a chief range officer with the National Range Officer Institute. I have competed in 2 IPSC World Championships and a European Handgun Championship. There are between 12 to 1,400 world-class competitors at an IPSC World Championship, representing between 75 and 85 countries. Where do I stand on Bill C-21? My greatest concern is the freeze or ban on the importation, sale, and purchase or transfer of handguns in Canada. I disagree with this. It will not significantly reduce violent crime committed with illegal handguns. The Firearm Act is in place to regulate private ownership in firearms by licensed owners and does not regulate criminals and illegal handguns. There are aspects in the Firearms Act that need to be better enforced, which would make a difference in strengthening and achieving the objectives of the Act. For example, prohibition enforcement and license revocation. More regulatory legislation is being added to the Firearms Act, which does not address that over 90% of all violent crimes with firearms are committed with illegal guns smuggled in from the United States into Canada. There are over 2.5 million licensed firearms owners who want the same thing that Canadians who do not own firearms. We all want our communities to be safe. I believe in logical, common sense gun control regime. I believe it's required. The regulations must be reasonable and meet the aim and objectives of what the Firearms Act is meant to accomplish. The average Canadian does not know how strict our firearms law are. There is a lot of misinformation and incorrect information floating around. I believe that all levels of government have a responsibility to ensure that the accurate information is passed on to Canadians without bias, and that their decisions on laws, regulations, and policies are based on hard facts, supportable statistics, and credible research data, academic and technical, and not on emotion. Many Canadians don't agree that a firearms ban on legally owned firearms and or tighter gun control laws will reduce violent crimes with illegal guns. They believe that there is a great need to address those root causes that contribute to violent crime: poverty, homelessness, lack of job opportunity, and lack of mental health support. These root causes must be addressed if significant impact to reducing violent crime is to be achieved. We have heard many politicians say, we are not targeting licensed firearm owners. Sport shooters can continue to enjoy their sports. It is a fallacy to believe that Bill C-21 and its freeze on handguns will not affect handgun sports shooters. Many sports shooting disciplines will cease to exist as no new members can join. Levels of competition will dwindle. Provincial and national championships will not be organized due to the ever decreasing competitor base. Without higher level competition, we won't be able to compete at the world level. As sports shooting ceases to exist, fewer people will be exposed to sports shooting and fewer people will be interested in becoming Olympic shooters. Sports shooting disciplines such as IPSC are feeder sports to the Olympics. You don't just become an Olympic shooter by asking the Canadian Olympic Committee. Shooting ranges are supported by handgun owners and sports shooting disciplines through competitions. The reason for the existence of ranges is primarily due to handgun shooters, as it is the only location that they can practice their sport. The membership in the sports will dwindle, so the membership in the ranges will dwindle. The ranges will lose major revenue and will eventually have to close. Many municipal, provincial, and federal police services rent civilian ranges to conduct their basic and advanced firearm qualification. It is far less expensive for law enforcement to rent a civilian range to maintain their own range facility. This will be an increase in cost to police services for municipalities. When a handgun owner dies, their legally acquired property must be handed over to law enforcement or to the government without providing any compensation to the family. This is deferred confiscation. Many families will lose thousands to tens of thousands of dollars when these handguns are confiscated. This is unacceptable. Many families will pay the price. Literally, I absolutely will, sir, for crime committed by others. The focus on legal handgun ownership as a way to reduce violent crimes with guns is misguided. Legally owned firearms are not the cause of increasing violent crime. Gun gangs, drug dealers, and smugglers use illegal guns and are the problem. Finally, I am proud to represent Canada on the world level in IPSC. IPSC is an official member of the Global Association of International Sports Federation and the Alliance of Independent Recognized Member Sports, AIMS. AIMS is recognized by the International Olympic Committee and has signed a memorandum of understanding with IOC. I ask that the consideration be given to IPSC to be added as a sports shooting discipline as part of the exemption to Bill C-121 in Section 97.1, subparagraph B. I welcome any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. We will go now to Ms. Zaretsky with the Alberta Mounted Shooters Association. 5 minutes, please. You're on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Julie Zaretsky, and I am the current president of the Alberta Mounted Shooters Association. I am here to speak to you about amending Bill C-21 to include the sport of mounted shooting under the elite sport shooters classification and or receive an approved status similar to the film and television industry that would allow us to continue to grow and develop our athletes. The recent implementation of the rule that prohibits the sale, transfer, or purchase of restricted handguns in Canada has a detrimental effect on the continuation and growth of our sport. For those of you unfamiliar with the sport of mounted shooting, this sport combines target shooting and horsemanship. A team consisting of a horse and rider navigate a course of targets against the timer clock. The rider carries two .45 caliber single action revolver loaded with black powder blanks that have a maximum distance of 20 feet or 6 meters. Please note there are not any projectiles or bullets, thereby making it a spectator-friendly sport. Our horses are highly trained athletes and our riders exhibit exceptional riding and gun handling skills. Mounted shooting is a family-oriented, multi-generational sport consisting of athletes ranging in age from 7 to 77. Many families travel and compete together throughout the year. An example of the family cohesiveness this sport provides is the Litvak family from Stettler, Alberta, where the grandparents, Don and Kathy, compete with their kids as well as their grandchildren on a regular basis. Children under 18 years of age are called wranglers and ride the same pattern as the grown-ups, but mimic the engagement of the targets as if they were shooting real blanks. To help children learn safe gun handling and sharp shooting skills, along with respect for a firearm, our wranglers will ground shoot from a stationary position, 10 targets, under the direct supervision of a range master and another qualified adult. Mounted shooting is an important sport that helps develop shooting skill sets and proficiencies that help youth transition to Olympic and Paralympic shooting events such as biathlon or target shooting. Additionally, the horsemanship skills gained by participating in mounted shooting helps riders to go on to participate in Olympic and Paralympic disciplines such as reining, dressage, vaulting, and jumping. The demographics of mounted shooters across the world will find mounted shooters in Europe, South and North America, Australia, New Zealand, and in Canada, mounted shooters come from BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, and Nova Scotia. The sport of mounted shooting is dominated by women, making up 65% of active competitors. Additionally, 60% of all competitors, male and female, are 50 plus years of age. Mounted shooters' occupations consist of doctors, RCMP officers, veterinarians, college professors, ranchers, farmers, Canadian Armed Forces personnel, business owners, nurses, corporate executives, city police officers, government employees, mothers, fathers, and students, to name a few. Mounted shooters tend to live in suburban and rural communities. Many mounted shooting events take place in more rural areas, and these events are important and contribute to the local economies where these competitions are located. A few examples of competition locations in rural areas are Creston, BC, Staveley, Alberta, Carrot Creek, Saskatchewan, Miami, Manitoba, Blue Mountain, Ontario, Little Brass, Dar, Nova Scotia. On the other side of the fence, we either compete or are invited to demonstrate mounted shooting at events such as the Calgary Stampede, Ponoka Stampede, Agribition in Regina, Saskatchewan, and the Selkirk Rodeo. We help local youth groups raise money for their activities by offering them a paid role in running part of our shooting competitions. Canada is well represented on the world stage, and since Canadians started competing in mounted shooting in 2004, we have produced many world champions and reserve world champions. Each year, an average of 15 to 20 Canadian competitors attend the world championships. We are a very safety conscious group, and before we become a mounted shooter, we must complete the training, testing, and background checks to obtain our restricted gun licenses. At our competitions, safety meetings are conducted at the start of each competition day, and a range master is in the arena at all times to ensure safe riding and shooting is exercised. We're a passionate group of competitors who value our community, and we refer to our community as our shooting family.
Excuse me, could you wrap up soon?
Yes. We want to continue our sport with more Canadians. We want to grow and develop skilled target shooters and equestrians. We want the ability to continue the legacy for our youth and produce more world champions. Again, we ask that the mounted shooting be part of the exempt parties listed in Bill C-21. There are many shooting sports that should be given recognition and exemption from Bill C-21, not just Olympic and Paralympic sports. Perhaps strong consideration should be given to turning the approval process over to the provincial chief firearms officers, as they're most closely in touch with the competitors and legitimacy of shooting sports within their province. In closing, eradicating our sport and letting it die with the current legislation won't have any impact on crime. It just makes mounted shooting and law-abiding citizens collateral damage. It takes away from a sport that encourages family involvement and community spirit. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. We'll go now for Dr. Koke, President of Coalition for Gun Control. 5 minutes, please.
Thanks very much for including me, and I'm joining you from the traditional territory of the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, and the Wendat peoples. And I want to start by thanking you for rescheduling me and allowing me to speak. I will follow up with a written brief. A few things I think that are important to mention. The Coalition for Gun Control represents 200 organizations, including the Canadian Public Health Association, community organizations, groups like the Canadian Labour Congress, victims organizations, and more than 75 women's groups. Our focus is public safety. 70% of Canadians support a complete ban on handguns and have for 30 years. So in our view, this law is very important in both addressing the issues of public safety that have been raised by experts and also in translating the will of Canadians into action. A few comments. We've heard a lot about the cost to sports shooters, the cost to the gun industry. Just like to remind the committee that the last analysis that was done of gun death and injury in Canada estimated the annual cost at $6.6 billion in an article published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal. We support the provisions that strengthen licensing. We think that some of the provisions, however, need to be reconsidered. The government is responsible for issuing licenses. The government should be responsible for removing licenses, and expecting citizens to go to court for emergency revocations, I think, is misdirected. What we need to do is strengthen the responsiveness of the government and firearms officers to exercising their obligation to remove firearms from people who, in their opinion, are a threat to themselves or any other person. It's important that we recognize the legislation's role in suicide prevention, not just in preventing domestic violence, mass shootings, and murders of police officers. The second area we think the legislation could be strengthened is with respect to the ban on semi-automatic military-style weapons. We think that a definition should be included that makes very clear the evergreen requirements for this legislation. We know from the 1995 Orders in Council that gun manufacturers will circumvent any lists that are provided. So it's important to have a clear definition, perhaps like the California law, in the legislation, as well as the OICs. We actually oppose anything other than a very narrow exemption to the ban on the sale and transfer of handguns. And again, the proliferation of handguns in the last 15 years has seen more than double the number of restricted weapons legally owned in Canada. And we've seen a dramatic rise in gun-related death and injury. It's simply not true that all gun violence is a function of smuggled guns. The facts do not support that. And finally, I would invite members of the committee to take a really close look at what sports like the International Practical Shooters Confederation do. While active, members of the armed forces and police officers need to be able to undertake defensive shooting and shoot at targets shaped like people in scenarios, perhaps, as part of their training. There's no need in Canada for civilians to be involved in such activities, and it's very much at odds with Canadian values and culture. And just in closing, I would say that there is ample evidence in the peer-reviewed research from around the world that stronger restrictions on guns save lives. Canada, the UK, Australia have the same rates of murder without guns. And they have problems with poverty, they have problems with drug abuse. Last year, the United Kingdom had fewer than 30 gun murders, and Australia had 1/5 the number that we did in Canada. So it's very clear that restricting access to firearms has an impact on the misuse of guns, as well as the diversion of legal guns to illegal markets. And those things are worth sacrificing people's hobbies for. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will now start our questioning. In the first round, we will start with Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Lloyd, please go ahead, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question for the Mounted Shooters Association. Would you agree that not all handguns are the same?
That is correct. We use a single action handgun that is simple technology.
Use a semi-automatic handgun, is that correct?
No, we do not. We are a single action firearm where we have to pull the trigger back, and it is simple technology designed from the 1890s.
So would I be correct in saying that if an exemption was made so that C-21 only applied to semi-automatic handguns, that your sport would be allowed to continue, you would still be able to continue
Correct.
and thrive?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. My next question for Lieutenant Colonel Schneiderbanger. As a veteran, how important was it for you when you left the forces to be able to participate in sports shooting? I think you're muted, sir.
Sorry. It gave me an opportunity to remain connected with other veterans and current members of the armed forces, because many of them do partake in these sports. It's a great outdoor sport. It gave me ability to challenge myself physically and keep myself mentally fit as well. So I found it very important, and I took up the sport immediately upon retirement, actually, 12 years ago.
Do you think that denying veterans who will not be exempted under C-21 the ability to participate in this kind of sport shooting will have a negative impact on their well-being?
Yes, I do. They have skills that they can immediately use in a sport activity, which is healthy. It's a very safe sport, highly regulated. IPSC is an example. I'll speak to that. Highly regulated. And it keeps people and keeps the veterans actively fit and mentally fit.
Do you think that it makes any sense for legislation like C-21 where you can have a military member, a veteran, or a law enforcement member who is mandated to use a handgun for their job day to day, but under this legislation will not be allowed to purchase, own, or transfer a handgun personally?
Well, I have a hard time with that. Yes, I think it doesn't make much sense. I mean, if you can't rely on former veterans or former military members to be safe and responsible and law-abiding members, then I think we have a bigger problem.
Now, we know that handgun owners, as a condition of their license, must be a paying member of a certified firearms range. Has this requirement been critical to the sustainability of gun ranges in Canada?
Yes, I mean, the reason for the existence of most ranges is the fact that only handgun shooters can only shoot at the ranges. So the majority or vast membership of these ranges are handgun shooters, and therefore those sports disciplines who use handguns. And there are many, many sport disciplines: IDPA, International Defensive Pistol Association, 3-gun, cowboy action, mounted cowboy action, IPSC, just to name a few.
Yeah. Do you believe that this legislation then would lead to a mass closure of firearms ranges across this country?
I absolutely do foresee that, and it will have unintended consequences that law enforcement, that's Canada Border Services, conservation officers, police officers, will have to have their own their own ranges, which will be very costly for the municipalities.
So currently what you're saying is that, law enforcement across this country, like with a few exceptions, they need to use these private ranges in order to practice marksmanship so that they can be good upholders of public safety.
Absolutely. I see them here all the time at my local range. RCMP, Border Services, conservation officers, along with my own municipal police services are here. And I actually have given them a lot of shooting advice to many of those officers on our range.
Now, do these officers, when they're going to the range, are they required to get an authorization to transport when they're going to the range to shoot? Or because it's part of their job, are they exempted from having to apply for that? Are you aware?
Yes, it depends on the firearm that they're using. If they're using their service firearm, they don't need an HET because according to the act, it's not required. But if it's their personal handgun, they do need an HET. And they would, of course, have, if it was their personal handgun, I mean, they have to have gone through all the courses and so forth and applied for a PAL and a restricted PAL.
Thank you. Do you think that this legislation will have a negative impact on promoting a culture of responsible firearms ownership and safety in Canada?
Handgun ownership, these sports disciplines, the majority of them have national or world bodies, and they're regulated, highly regulated. IPSC, we have a National Range Safety Officer Institute, which is recognized by the National Institute of Range Association, which they stipulate all the requirements of safety worldwide. Oops, something happened?
No, we're good. You have 10 seconds left. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. We'll go now to Mr. Chang. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the witnesses for joining us today and giving your precious time to this committee. My question is directed to Dr. Kukier. Doctor, in 2020, there were approximately 1.1 million registered handguns in Canada, a 74% increase since 2010. Why do you believe that minimizing the number of handguns in Canada will help reduce firearm violence and keep Canadians safe?
Thank you for the question. We know that while smuggled guns are a problem and more work is needed to address that, we have recommendations on that as well. A portion of firearms recovered in crime are legally sourced. The Danforth shooting, legal handgun. The mosque shooting, legal gun owner, legal handguns. In fact, most mass shootings in Canada over the last 20 years have been with legal guns, legal owners, or guns that were diverted from legal owners to illegal sources, as in the murders in Mayerthorpe. It's important, in our view, to respect the views of Canadians. Only about 300,000 gun owners in Canada have restricted weapons. There are lots of hunters and farmers who support a ban on handguns. There's a big difference between firearms that are reasonably used for hunting and those that are used for other sport. So I think it's important that we draw a line. The fact that the handgun imports doubled in the first 6 months of this year when the ban was announced tells you something about the drivers for this. And we've seen a dramatic increase of handgun violence in rural communities. While a lot of attention is focused on urban communities, with the proliferation of handguns, we've seen more handgun violence in rural communities. And while there are big questions around why people are owning handguns, many are not sports shooters, and we really need to turn off the tap.
According to Statistics Canada, 1 in 4 female victims of firearm-related violent crime were victimized by a current or a former spouse or intimate partner. How do you believe newly proposed red and yellow flag laws, which will remove firearms from home, where owners pose a risk to themselves or others, will help keep women safer from firearm violence? Are there any changes to this legislature you'd like to see to support victims of firearm-related intimate partner violence more effectively?
Thank you for the question. And intimate partner violence is something we really need to look at carefully because it is a form of violence that is far more frequent in rural communities where there are more guns in people's homes, just as we see more suicide in rural communities and murders of police officers. The provisions in the legislation which deal with restricting and removing firearms from people who have offenses or protection orders against them, all good moves. There are some nuances that we'll write about that some of the women's organizations have proposed. Remember that the law allows for a firearms officer to refuse a license or remove firearms from anyone who is considered a threat to themselves or any other person. And the risks associated with domestic violence, suicide, mass shootings are all interrelated. It's very important that those provisions be understood as being broad and that the firearms officers be obligated to remove firearms when there is risk. This is partly legislative, but it's also partly implementation of the law. The piece of the legislation that we have concerns about are the, however well-intentioned, are the provisions that require citizens to go to court for emergency prohibition orders. Our view is that's the responsibility of the state, that's the responsibility of police, and we would prefer to see a hotline that is served, serviced, and acted upon in short order when concerns are brought forward. We know from the Desmond inquiry, for example, in Nova Scotia, that people raised concerns about the killer, who was a veteran's access to firearms, but no action was taken. And we've seen way too many inquiries and inquests that show people had information that someone was potentially a threat to themselves or someone else, and yet action was not taken. And we need to really tighten up not just the legislation, but the implementation of the legislation and the accountability police and firearms officers have for keeping us safe. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Dr. Kukia. We have been hearing from many organizations related to sports shooting and airsoft sports. In your view, what exemption should be given to the national freeze on handguns for these groups and organizations do you think will be viable?
I really think that we have to make a choice between hobbies and our children's lives. I see it that starkly. And so I think any exemptions that are provided need to be very narrowly defined. And with respect to the Lieutenant Colonel, IPSC is not a sport that most Canadians, and in fact most gun owners, would believe deserves an exemption, given that it essentially promotes arming for self-protection.
Thank you, Mr. Chang. On y va maintenant, Madame Michaud. Allez-y.
Ms. Michaud, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for coming. I'll continue with you, Dr. Coquille, for the Coalition for Gun Control. You have said that certain exemptions need to be better defined in the Act, and I agree with you. If we start exempting all of the groups that request an exemption, we're going to really undermine the bill. And I'm wondering, how do you interpret the bill as it is written now, where individuals that practice at a Paralympic or Olympic level will be exempted? It seems to me that there's a little bit of flux here as to who's exempted and who isn't. A few weeks ago, there were some public safety officials who said that they didn't seem to really understand what the exemption was about either.
I think it's going to be very difficult. And I think certainly some narrow exemptions for Olympic shooters could be entertained. Certainly Germany, which has very strict gun control laws, does have some provisions for sports shooters. But I may be training for gymnastics, for the Olympic gymnastics team. I can tell you that. How can I prove it? How can I prove that I am an Olympic class gymnast? I think those are the kinds of questions that are really going to have to be clarified in the application of this legislation. And while I understand the arguments that people make about, oh, well, we're going to lose the feeders to our sport, again, I'll come back to my basic point, which is most Canadians want a ban on handguns, and we have to choose public safety over people's hobbies.
I have another question on the handgun ban. There seems to be some ambiguity here. The government will leave it up to the provinces to draft letters to the shooting clubs to say such and such a person is exempted, but that leaves a little bit of a vacuum in Quebec and the shooting clubs. Well, we know now that there are people who want to challenge C-21. What does that mean to you to see that the federal government is setting up a freeze, but it's not really all that national because certain provinces can decide to act differently than others? And the Prime Minister says, starting now, immediately, this freeze is now in effect. But when you go on the government site, you can see that it's not yet in the Canada Gazette. It doesn't come into force until November 9th. So what type of message are we conveying?
I thank you very much again for the question. And I do think that the federal government has to be very careful that it's not seen to be downloading its responsibilities on the province. We opposed, as did the mayors across the country in large municipalities, the efforts to download the handgun ban to municipalities. We opposed the efforts to download it to the provinces. And you raise a very, very important point that needs to be addressed. We have to ensure that the exemptions don't become the rule. And we know that some provinces are very opposed to stronger laws, and they will exempt everybody. So it's critically important that the guidelines be very precise and explicit about who can and cannot be exempted, and minimal discretion be allowed to the provinces.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I have one final question. With respect to assault weapons, there was an order in May which said that not all assault rifles would be prohibited, that there were some store owners that were able to get around the regulations, and the government with C-21 has promised that it will amend its own bill to include a section that would prohibit assault weapons. Are you confident that the government will keep its province and amend this bill, C-21?
I think that the government has introduced this legislation in good faith. I think it's true that it's the most significant legislation that has been introduced in the last probably 20 years. However, the opposition parties have a very important role to play in holding their feet to the fire and ensuring that the most rigorous interpretation of this law is contained in the regulations, and that no amendments that weaken this legislation are allowed to get through the committee. That would be my ask.
To conclude, so you are in favor of Bill C-21. Of course, everything can be improved. Do you have any suggestions you would like to make? Maybe we're not going far enough. Maybe we're going too far.
The obligations on the firearms officer to remove firearms when someone is identified as a risk to themselves or any other person need to be strengthened. I think that any loopholes with respect to the ban on handguns need to be really clarified for reasons that you've identified. I think as well we need a clear definition of semi-automatic military style firearms in the legislation, not just in the orders in council. And I think that we have to ensure that it's well understood that firearms are a risk. While there are legitimate uses for some firearms in hunting and for pest control, and obviously Indigenous peoples have a right to hunt.
I'm going to have to cut you off there.
We need to address those things.
Merci, Madame. We go now to
Merci.
Mr. McGregor. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you to our witnesses for joining our committee today as we go through the provisions of C-21. I'd like to start with the Coalition for Gun Control. Welcome back to our committee, Dr. Culquier. I was reading the brief today. There was an updated brief from the Canadian Association of Emergency Physicians on the red flag laws in C21. And they are still sticking to their point from the earlier version of this bill in the previous parliament, in that they feel that placing the onus on a family person to go through the court system is the wrong way to go. They would prefer to have a system whereby emergency physicians have a process where they can have reporting. Unfortunately for us, though, that is primarily under provincial jurisdiction. And, you know, the testimony on how the red flag laws are written in C21 are kind of all over the map. I mean, I think there's an understanding out there that red flag laws are important. They're just not sure that the way C21 is written is the correct way. So I guess I'm going to ask my question in a different way. You've had it before, but can you see any way whereby the existing clauses of C21 can be saved, or do we need to just simply get rid of them altogether? Do you believe there is a place for a court system to be involved? I mean, we have a very high rate of suicide by handguns, or by firearms in Canada. Do you think there's a process whereby, you know, someone should be able to use the court system, or should it just always fall on our police services primarily?
Thank you for the question. And, you know, as I said, I think that the provisions were well intentioned. I do think they're based on experience in the US, which is not relevant to Canada. We already have continuous eligibility checking built into the process. We already have a principle, which is that the firearms officer can remove a firearm or deny a license to someone who is a risk to themselves or any other person. What we don't have are the provisions that require that to be done. What we don't have are the provisions that provide mechanisms whereby if a complaint is made, action is taken. I can tell you from my own experience reporting a case, I was on hold with the Ontario Firearms Office for 24 hours. I literally put the phone down, went home, came back the next morning, and I was still listening to music. That has to stop. So I think what we will do is provide some language, but in general, we agree with the Canadian Association of Emergency Physicians in their concerns that this could be perceived as downloading responsibility to citizens rather than holding police and officials accountable. And we've seen the consequences of that with the mass casualty inquiry in most recently in Nova Scotia.
And to the part of the bill that, you know, provides for Olympic and Paralympic as shooting disciplines, you made a comment about, you know, there are many people in Canada who own a handgun but do not engage in a shooting discipline. So you openly wondered, like, what is the purpose of them owning a handgun if they're not part of a shooting discipline? I've heard suggestions that, you know, with the disciplines that are mentioned in the bill, there should be like further requirements to demonstrate that you're an active participant, you're actively training, because there were concerns, you know, spoken to me about how someone could just, you know, say, oh, I'm a member of this club, I'm going to buy my handgun, and then get rid of the membership, and they're left with the handgun.
Well, it's my point. I'm a gymnast training for the Olympics. Do I have any chance of being a competitor in the Olympics? No, but I could say that, and there are real concerns about that issue. I mean, we know Colton Boushey was killed by someone who said they had a handgun for shooting coyotes, which is not a legal purpose for having a handgun. We know of many, many cases across the country where handguns have been misused. And when you dig into why the person had them, there's a lot of question about whether they legally acquired them. The leader of the trucker protest, for example, obtained a handgun after he was prohibited from owning firearms. So there are a lot of gaps, there are a lot of questions, and there's a lot of evidence that people are arming for self-protection, which is not based in Canadian law or culture. And we have to nip that in the bud.
Thank you. And then for my final minute, I'd like to turn to Mr. Schneiderbanger. I, over the summer, visited my own local range, the Victoria Fish and Game Protective Association. They invited me to watch an IPSC competition. So I was versed in the safety aspects of that, but for our committee, and so it's on the record, can you just talk about some of the safety procedures that are in place for all of the contestants who engage in the sport while they're actively on the range?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So you have two levels of range officers. You've got chief range officers, and you've got range officers. The range officers themselves, there are two of them that follow the participant throughout the stage. There's a primary and a secondary. Each have their own specific jobs of what they do to watch for safety, while the chief range officer is watching the overall situation in the stage as we go through for safety. We run our black badge courses, which you must take to be able to shoot IPSC, and it's all about safety, safety, safety for almost half of that course. And then once we get out and we do practical training on the range, once again, safety is continually
I'm sorry, sir, I'm
brought
going to
up.
have to cut you off there.
Yes, no problem.
No worries. Thank you all. So we're going to start our second round now. We won't have time for a full second round. I believe we'll have time for one slot for each party. So we'll start with Ms. Dancho. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. My first question is for Colonel Schneiderbanger. It's nice to see you again, sir. Thank you for being with us. You were mentioning in your remarks and to past questioning today that there are police forces who utilize gun ranges that they don't own, that they utilize community gun ranges. I have one of those actually in my community in West St. Paul in Manitoba that the Manitoba RCMP use. So can you just reiterate your concern? Are these at risk of closing, and what impact would that have on our police forces and our municipalities?
Yes, the ranges are at risk of closing. The vast majority of members that support these ranges are handgun owners and the sports shooting disciplines, as this is the only place that they can practice their sport. The RCMP here in my local area, my own municipal police force, as I said, and border services, and come here and train because they don't have their own ranges. The expense to maintain their own facility will be significant, and municipalities will bear that extra cost.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
I just also wanted to ask you, you're obviously former military. Did you grow up in a military family or a police family, or were you inspired on your own to join the military?
I was inspired to join the military on my own.
Thank you much for your service. And since you've retired, you've engaged in sports shooting. And how has that supported you and other veterans that you've seen in your post-Army life?
It's been fantastic. It's given me a sense of accomplishment. It's given me a chance to meet with other people from around the world, a chance to mentor, coach, teach people about sports shooting and safety and so forth. It's great for my mental health and for my physical. I'm almost 60 years old, and I can keep up with the young 25-year-old people, whether they're female or male, on the ranges.
Thank you very much. Thank you. My next question is for Ms. Saretsky. Ms. Saretsky, you talked a lot about the legacy in your family and how your sports shooting competition has been multi-generational. You grew up in Alberta, is that correct? Did you grow up around ranchers and farmers and other sports shooters? Is that?
No, interestingly enough, my background, I'm actually from Manitoba, and hadn't been involved with any sort of firearms and such until 2017. I was actually a show jumper prior to that. And I was introduced to the sport, fell in love with the camaraderie and the ability to learn how to use a firearm correctly, as well as couple it with the riding and horsemanship portion of our sport.
Yes, thank you very much. And you mentioned the others that you compete with. You mentioned that and again, I just want to go back to like the legacy part that you said in the multi-generational. Where's that comment coming from? Are those you compete with? You mentioned grandpas and parents?
Yeah. There's many families, especially in Alberta, that started mounted shooting and have been involved in shooting sports. We're a family of, like, you'll have, like I said, multi-generational, as in, grandparents and parents and children that are involved in sports. So it creates that family event, keeps the family together and creates those family values and such.
Yeah, thank you very much. The reason I ask is certainly those that I knew who sport shooted growing up and were often from hunting families. They were often ranchers and cowboys.
Yes.
And it certainly is part of the culture, I would say, strongly in Western Canada and rural Canada, is where I'm from as well. And so often, certainly since I've come to Ottawa, I feel that some in Ottawa and some powerful people in the East and in certain political parties look down their nose at folks like us with our background. And it seems to be a constant battle for legitimacy that our culture has every right to exist, that Western Canada has a firearm culture that hunts, to say nothing for the Indigenous culture of hunting and sport shooting in their own right that dates back, of course, far longer than my family's been in Canada. But I just, I certainly feel that is under consistent attack from the current administration, from the Liberal government. Can you comment on your thoughts on that? Do you feel the same, that you are constantly having to justify the existence of the culture you engage in on a day-to-day?
Yes, it depends on what part of the country, or if I'm in the city versus being rural, or if I'm traveling and, you get talking to somebody about what you do and I'm a mounted shooter. And what is that? So you explain that you shoot balloon targets off of a moving horse with black powder blanks, not even a projectile. And depending on what part of the country I'm in, it's like, oh my gosh, it's a firearm and such. But when you start to explain to people that these firearms, that we're shooting blanks, that they're a single action, just like John Wayne in the John Wayne movies. I mean, in my own family, until my mother saw the sport in person, she didn't change her mind. She had a preconceived notion that what we were doing wasn't necessarily correct. And so until she saw it in person, she thought that it was something nefarious. Yes.
Thank you very much for your remarks.
Thank you. We'll go now to Mr. Van Bynen, please. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I also want to thank all of our witnesses for adding their perspective onto this issue. There's much to be learned, and I'm eager to hear all of the different perspectives. I do want to clarify, though, that the national freeze on handguns came into force via the regulatory amendments to the Firearms Act on approval by the Governor General and registration on October 21st, 2022, and that the regulations have been in force since then. The text of the regulations will be published in the Canada Gazette on November the 9th. This is just a publication date, and as the regulations are already in force. And until then, they are temporarily posted for ease of reference on the government's website. I'd like to direct my questions over to Madam Coulier, Dr. Coulier. And my question is that there have been some concerns that have been raised with respect to the red and yellow flag items. I just want to emphasize that in the context of this being in addition to existing regulations, and I appreciate that much work needs to be done in the responsiveness, as you've highlighted earlier, but as a supplemental or an additional avenue for people who feel like they're at risk of violence, would there be any additional amendments that you would make to reflect that context in the legislation?
Thanks very much for the question, and I do think that the context is important because there is a risk that these will be viewed as an alternative, and instead of the police responding in a timely fashion to concerns, people will be directed to the courts. And so we're still working on proposed amendments. Some people, as you know, are simply recommending striking those provisions entirely. There may be some merit, and so we're trying to be perfectly honest, we're trying to figure out how to navigate the different views of organizations like the Canadian Association of Emergency Physicians. I'm inclining towards their position, but there may be a way to retain some measures with the appropriate context. Thank you for the question.
Great, thank you. Could you describe for the committee some of your research in relation to the correlation between firearms legislation and suicide rates? And do you believe that gun control is an effective suicide prevention tool?
Yes, I co-authored a book with Vic Seidel, who is past president of the American Public Health Association, called The Global Gun Epidemic. And what it shows is on a global basis, among industrialized countries, there's a very strong relationship between the availability of firearms, suicide with firearms, and overall suicide. It's particularly pronounced even within Canada when you look at differences between, for example, urban centers, rural centers, the East and the West. And I have to say, with respect, that recent studies, for example, on suicide by military veterans does mention the availability of firearms being a factor that needs to be addressed. The availability of lethal means is associated with what we call suicide completions, which means 93% of suicides attempted with a firearm will result in death versus other means. So I think that the evidence is pretty unequivocal that the availability of firearms is associated with suicide rates, and legislation which reduces the availability of firearms to people who are a risk to themselves or others is associated with reductions in suicide. If you look at Canada's track record, after Bill C-68, we were on a trajectory that was very comparable to what we saw in Australia. And then when the laws were relaxed, we saw that trend reversed.
Okay. You had mentioned earlier that there should be a very narrow definition of the weapons that are permitted, specifically with reference to semi-automatic and other items. Having said that, do you believe that the IPSC or the mounted shooters should be exempted in this law?
Certainly, IPSC should not be. I'm not familiar with the mounted shooters, but our position is very, very narrow definition restricted to Olympic shooting with requirements that people demonstrate that they're actually legitimate. And that requires some work.
Okay.
Thank
now,
you,
you'd
Mr.
mentioned
Van
earlier.
Buyden.
Thank you. Thank you.
We go now, Madame Michaud, 2 minutes et demi, s'il vous plaît.
Ms. Michaud, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to thank MP Van Buyden for rectifying the information with respect to the Gazette of Canada. But now I understand we're on the same wavelength. I have a question for Ms. Saretsky. I've heard your concerns with respect to Bill C-21 and on the handgun ban and your fears for the sport. But going back to C-21, are there any aspects in the bill that you are in favor of? Let's say the increase of minimum sentencing, the fact that we can revoke a license or suspend a license for an individual who is suspected of being involved in reprehensible behavior. Some groups have talked about very positive aspects of the bill. Do you feel that there are all the same some good things about Bill C-21?
Thank you for the question. I feel that if somebody is a danger to society, a proven danger to society, and possibly suspected of being a danger to themselves or to the public, I think it bears witness to be able to flag that individual. For us, we're most concerned that our single action firearms are not included under that definition of being a restricted weapon and not being able to use them. So although there are positive aspects of C21, of Bill C21, that we would like to ensure that nobody gets hurt, we really are looking to be considered for our heritage, considered and such.
Je comprends. Il y a plusieurs groupes qui ont.
I understand. Several other groups have similar concerns as yours. They feel that the bill doesn't deal with the smuggling of firearms, which firearms that are used for the most shootouts, and criminals had people who had legal permits had their guns diverted to criminals. It's clear that we have to. I had a very long question, so I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McGregor, please go ahead. 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll turn to Lieutenant Colonel Schneiderbanger. Sir, you've heard the testimony, and certainly we have the verifiable evidence of the fact that, firearms in the home of someone who is contemplating suicide most often lead to a successful completion. I'm not sure, though, enough has been talked about like for the community that's involved in these shooting disciplines. You must have experienced some times when someone that maybe is having a down day. Can you just talk about, like, does your community sort of check in with one another? Are you doing wellness checks? Are you often having those meetings to ensure that everyone is, not having a bad day? Because that everyone there, of course, is a licensed firearms owner. Can you maybe just inform the community or our committee about that?
Thank you for the question. Absolutely. I can give you a personal anecdote there. We had one gentleman who was rather old, and we noted he was acting oddly. We immediately had him stop shooting, started talking to find out what was going on. And guess what? We determined that he had the onset of potentially of dementia, as an example. So he no longer shot. We informed his family and so forth, and appropriate action was taken. Most certainly, there's a lot of camaraderie in our sport, and we all want to remain safe. And by the way, we do not shoot at targets that represent human beings whatsoever. That is not the purpose of IPSC, to be training for defense using a pistol. It would be contrary to everything that we do in this sport. So absolutely, we check on our membership.
Thank you. And my final question to Ms. Soretsky. In your opening statement, you had said that you would like an exemption as is allowed for the film industry. In about 30 seconds, can you expand a little bit more on that, please?
Well, cowboy mounted shooting, the blanks that are used are very similar to what has been used in the film and television industry, creating westerns and such. It makes a lot of smoke, but is not. You're not going to be gravely injured by a blank being discharged and shot from a single action revolver. So. We do a lot of entertainment in the form of public appearances as well. But our single action revolvers and blanks is very similar to what is used in the film and television industry.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McGregor. So that wraps up our questioning for this panel. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for sharing their time with us today and your knowledge, expertise, and your concern. And it is certainly a help to our study. And with that, we will suspend and bring in the next panel. Thank you all.
Thank you.
So I now call this meeting back to order. So for the second panel, we have with us today, we have two groups. We have as an individual, we have Linda Cahill. Perhaps you could correct me if I've said this wrong, which I probably have. Civil engineer, Olympian. And we have the International Practice Shooting Confederation. In person today, we have Maida Russell, athlete, instructor, and official. And online, we have Mr. James Smith, president of the National Range Officers Institute. So thank you all for being here today. We will start with giving each group up to 5 minutes to make opening remarks. And we will start with Ms. Cahill. Cahill? Start with helping me know how to...
Keiko.
Keiko, thank you. Ms. Keiko, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So my name is Linda Keiko. I'm a professional civil engineer. I'm a mother to 3 young children, a 2-time Olympian in the sport of pistol shooting, and currently the president of the Alberta Handgun Association. So this is both a sport and an organization, which I feel is now at risk with the proposals of the Bill C-21. I'm a medalist at both the Pan American Games and the Commonwealth Games. And currently I now spend a lot of time that I could be training or spending with my family, applying for additional permits on top of the already process to be able to get an authorization to transport when I'm leaving the country to represent Canada. I've represented Canada on the world stage for over 20 years. And quite honestly, I can say that there's no greater honor than being able to wear the maple leaf and representing my country. However, recent changes and implementation of the handgun bans have done nothing for reducing violence, in my opinion. They've done nothing for increasing public safety. However, they have added several weeks to my preparation for international competition. Since the import of handguns was placed into effect on August 19th, I've spent more than 2 weeks communicating with the government department, only for them to realize they were not able to process my export permit, which usually takes up to about 6 weeks to attain. I now have to pay to bring my own firearms back into the country while I represent Canada on the international stage. I've just recently returned from Cairo, Egypt, after competing in the World Championships, and I will shortly depart for the Championship of the Americas in Peru. Instead of being mentally prepared for these competitions, I'm now concerned whether I will receive my permits in time to be able to enter my own country, to be able to come home with my competitive equipment. The advertised purpose of Bill C-21 is to increase public safety. I really would like someone to explain to me how my firearms are a hazard to public safety. I have young children in my home, and there is no way that I would jeopardize my own children's safety, let alone anyone else's. And I'm concerned with changing rules and regulations while I'm away from home representing Canada, which literally has just occurred. Last week, I was out of the country when the new announcement came out. I really don't want to become a criminal while I'm away from home, while I'm representing the country, because those rules have arbitrarily been changed. And I don't want to be a criminal, and I do want something done about criminal activity to actually increase public safety. I compete internationally under the auspices of the Shooting Federation of Canada, which is a government-funded, recognized national sports governing body for the target shooting sports in Canada. And we're also an active member of the International Sports Shooting Federation, which is recognized by the IOC. The ISSF oversees many target disciplines involving air rifle, air pistol, small caliber rifles and pistols, and shotgun shooting sports. They're more than just the Olympic and Paralympic events and the disciplines that are recognized by the ISSF, because there's a lot of events that shift over time, but they're still recognized at that international level. Bill C-21 is an attempt to manage criminal violence. It may have some components that help to do that, but my concern is components of this really strangle the large portion of our sports resources. And it's competitively practiced by people who are 13 to well into their 80s and 90s. It is one of the most gender inclusive, age inclusive, physically inclusive sports that you could possibly find. Shooting sports of all types is very inclusive. And it doesn't matter your age or your ability. Achieving excellence in target shooting sports is something that is a common ground for everyone. There's numerous highly competitive shooting sports that use pistols, which are not in the Olympics. And we really depend on these sports to identify talent. And they help create a pathway for our athletes to become Olympians. And I can say that that's true. I started straight into the Olympic disciplines when I was a child. However, I know several of my teammates and competitors and people I've met internationally started in those non-Olympic events to be able to become Olympians and to become internationally recognized competitors. As the sole shooting Olympian representing Canada in Tokyo at the 2020 Olympics, attracting new shooters and identifying potential is already becoming very challenging. And with the proposed new regulations, without any increase to public safety, there's economic hardship on law-abiding citizens and shooting ranges in Canada that host multiple shooting sports events. Without these types of events, without these types of opportunities, our shooting ranges are also going to be at risk, which means that I now no longer have a place to train to be able to get to the Olympics.
Could you wrap it up, please?
Sure. Competitive shooters in any event are highly focused and trained into individuals who we really respect our equipment with the same regard as any other athlete, be it skiing, cycling, basketball. Shooting sports have the highest rating of safety above all sports. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go now to the International Practical Shooting Confederation. I don't know who will be speaking, whether it's Ms. Russell or Mr. Smith.
I will start.
5 minutes, please.
Good afternoon. I would like to start by thanking the committee for the opportunity to present today. I'd also like to introduce my co-presenter who was there in person, Maida Russell, who's a longtime competitive athlete and a 6-time Canadian national champion. I am presenting on behalf of the International Practical Shooting Confederation of Canada. Our purpose today is to have the committee consider amending Bill C-21 to have IPSC added as a sport discipline under Section 97(1)(I). Even though Bill C-21 is not an outright handgun ban, it will result in a slow demise for our sport in Canada. Having no new athletes introduced to replace the existing competitors and the inability to replace equipment as it wears out will result in the end of our sport over time. It'll also close the ranges that we participate in and result in no shooting for Olympics or police officers or other agencies that use our range for training. IPSC was first introduced in Canada as a sport in 1976 and has continued to expand since then and currently has over 5,000 participants in every province and territory in Canada. From its inception, Canada has been a world leader by implementing a mandatory requirement for a 2-day safety course in order to participate in our sport, the Black Badge program. In addition to the original course, the athletes must participate in regular matches to maintain their status and compete in the sport. IPSC athletes in Canada compete and train at their local clubs, and the best from each province qualify to compete at the national championships, where the best are then chosen to advance to the World Shoot. Much like the Olympics, the World Shoot is held every 3 years, and we have a proud Canadian athletes representing Canada at these international competitions every 3 years, typically maxing the amount at 60 that are allowed to participate. In addition to the athletes in our sport, we also have a cadre of over 600 international respected coaches and officials who participate in Canada and are in demand for the rest of the world. The International Practical Shooter Federation is the largest shooting sport association in the world with 109 member countries. This includes some of the countries that have banned handgun ownerships, such as the United Kingdom, New Zealand, and Australia, all of which allow athletes to compete and train in IPSC competition. IPSC internationally has been working toward recognition and the possible inclusion into the Olympics, and have recently been added as a full member for the Global Association of International Sports Federation, GIASF, who are the umbrella organization for all Olympic and non-Olympic sports internationally, as well as the Alliance of Independent Recognized Members of Sports. IPSC has also joined and implemented the practice of the World Doping Agency, as well as policies on ethics, conflict of interest, and gender equality. In summary, the addition of IPSC as an exempted sport in the legislation would allow existing and future athletes, coaches, and officials who currently devote hundreds of hours a year in pursuit of excellence the ability to continue in our sport. Thank you. I turn it over to Maida.
Mr. Chair, and members of the SECU committee, thank you for inviting the IPSC community to your meeting to present what we do, who we are, and why we do it. First of all, who am I? I'm a Canadian who came here at a very young age, who was taught from a very young age the 3 R's, which, as we know in school, is reading, writing, and arithmetic. But I was taught by my parents, again at a very early age, additional 3 R's, which today myself and the IPSC community follow. Responsibility, respect, and recognition. What do those 3 R's represent in my sport of IPSC? Well, responsibility is that there are good and bad consequences for your actions. I joined the sport of IPSC only with this one key understanding. Safety must be and is number one. Respect. We are inclusive, diverse, tolerate and understand differences, age, sex, orientation, culture, religion, all walks of life. We are members, everyone here, we are all members of the same race, the human race. Recognition. We emulate, we admire, we strive for excellence. What you put in is what you put out. So I learned all these things at an early age from my parents, who were teaching professionals. I'll roll it forward to 31 years.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up in, say, 15 seconds.
Okay. I joined because we need more women in our sport. I'm an athlete. I've represented Canada proudly in our opening ceremonies, and I am now also an official, chief range officer, an instructor, the coach, the first coach in Canada. And I have, at the age of 62 years, been the only woman in North America to have won an international level 3 championship, because this sport has allowed me to strive for this excellence, to do the best that I can, to have safe fun in a controlled, regulated organization, which is international, has governance, has code of ethics, recognizes diversity, and above all, safety is number one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll start our questions right now. We'll start with the first round with Mr. Motz. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. And thank you to Ms. Keiko and Ms. Russell for representing us as well as you have on the international front, and we too are very proud of you. And let me first start by apologizing for another misguided attempt at public safety by this government, who's out of touch on public safety and firearm issues. And I apologize on behalf of them for the impact it'll have on your sports. And Ms. Keiko, would you say that someone who, or banning legally owned handguns owned by those who operate, who have a license and they're law-abiding sport shooters and handgun owners, prevent gun violence in this country?
By banning law-abiding citizens from having firearms, I don't think it does anything for public safety. I don't think it does anything to reduce violence. When you look at statistics for violent acts, we're literally the violent acts within Canada, from Statistics Canada, we're talking about 3%. 3% are actually of violent acts within Canada are done with firearms. So if you want to deal with violence in Canada, then you deal with the 97%, and it will likely attribute also and include that 3% of firearms activities. And of those firearms activities that have violence in them, I'm going to say the majority are not by law-abiding citizens, because all of us who have firearms are competitive. We go to the range, we train, number one, to be able to attend any sort of a range or to be able to take our firearms out or to transport them. We have to go through rigorous safety protocols at courses. We are having continual safety checks 24 hours a day, reference checks all the time. So when it comes to public safety, essentially limiting my use of firearms, limiting a law-abiding use of firearms, I don't see how that actually affects anybody's improvement of public safety.
Thank you. You know, I'm sure both of you, Ms. Russell and you, Ms. Keiko, woke up one morning and all of a sudden you were an Olympian. You were an international sports shooter. It just happened. But we know different. For you, Ms. Keiko, you started at age 11. And it took you many, many years, as did you, Ms. Russell, to acquire the skills. How can you pass on, with Bill C-21, how is it possible to pass on the legacy, the tradition that has been instilled in both of your families to this way of life with Bill C-21? How is that possible?
I don't know that it is, honestly. This is the regulations that are in place right now, although they say and they call out Olympians and sports shooters, and I think that it should be expanded to be more inclusive of sports shooters, because there's many more disciplines other than just the Olympics. But to get new people into the sport, to bring more talent in, to be able to coach, to be able to bring possibly my children up and teach them the shooting sports. This is a huge barrier to be able to actually pass that on, to be able to get people into the sport, to be able to have them do the safety courses, and to be able to compete as well. I think it was said in the previous panel, how do you prove that you are an Olympic shooter? And I have the same question. How are we supposed to prove who is competitive shooting and not? And I don't know the difference between safety of an Olympic shooter and a recreational shooter, quite honestly.
Okay.
The people I train with are just as safe.
I'm just going to cut you off because I want to move on to another line of questioning. As you know, obviously there's a significant difference between a sports shooter, a licensed firearm owner who is law-abiding, and a criminal who would commit offenses with a firearm. We know that. And we also know that, again, this legislation will do absolutely nothing to improve public safety. It will not, unfortunately, deal with the issues that we're trying to deal with on illegally obtained firearms and the illegal use of firearms. So do you, either one of you, see anything in Bill C-21 that would prevent gun crime? I'll start with you, Ms. Russell.
We need legislation. We need regulations. We need policy. We have it in our sport. We recognize that it is critical and important, and therefore that's why safety is number one. Bill C-21 has provisions for public safety, but what it needs to recognize, or the people that are making these laws, that they need to address the 90 or whatever that exact percentage is of criminals, illegal persons who have no respect for life. Respect is very important in our sport. And they are the ones that the bill needs to address. We are legal, law-abiding firearms owners. I don't know the exact number, or hundreds of thousands. We are vetted 24/7 by the federal CPIC system. Therefore, if I was to do anything, a law enforcement officer will flag that and go and investigate, which they should. Safety is number one. We don't deny that. And therefore, we ensure with our governance and our structure and the way that we organize our sport and the other shooting sports that are existing in Canada, we make sure that this is critical and number one.
Thank you very much, both of you, for your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. We go now to Ms. DeMoff. Ms. DeMoff, go ahead. 6 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all our witnesses for being here today, and to those ladies that are here that have represented Canada on the international stage. I want to thank you for representing our country. Mr. Smith, it's nice to see you, and I have a question for you. The United Kingdom has much stricter gun control laws than we do here in Canada. And yet they put a team in the Olympics every year. I've been on their website and they talk about their long history of success in shooting sports at the Olympics. Can you explain to us how Great Britain, how they continue to encourage people to be in the Olympics while also having a handgun ban in the country?
I can only speak to the IPSC competitors, but at the World Shoot, the UK always has a team, as does North Ireland. We do have a gentleman that comes to Canada to shoot from the UK, and he's explained their laws. And the handgun ban isn't complete in the UK. The Channel Islands and the Isle of Man both allow handgun ownership, and as does Northern Ireland. So the people in our sport that want to participate actually travel to those locations and train and compete there, and then compete on the world stage.
Okay, thank you. Also, Mr. Smith, you were, sorry, I just have to find it here. You were quoted as saying, should IPSC be granted an exemption, we will become the gateway to handgun ownership in Canada and can expect a huge increase in membership. This has been brought up because they do not want to end up with IPSC being used for general shooters to acquire handguns and not truly be competitors. And I think that gets to the heart of the issue that we have had, and I have heard from constituents as well as advocates, that the concern with opening this up further is that IPSC becomes, just as you said, the gateway to handgun ownership. So I'm wondering, how can we ensure that that's not what's going to happen, that IPSC just becomes the gateway to circumventing the freeze that we put on handgun ownership?
Well, I guess that would be an issue of trust, but through the regulations, as we currently do, and you can't just start shooting IPSC, you have to take the black badge course, and you also have to maintain a certain amount of participation to maintain it, or you lose your, if you do not participate for 2 years, then you lose your black badge qualification and either have to retake it. And as far as an influx, if we are the only handgun sport in Canada, we would presume that people that want to preliminarily go to the Olympics and do other sports will join. That statement came based on the fact that we, at this point, our instructors are flat out, and we'd need a larger group to actually start doing it. And we probably will need the accommodation at the ranges would not be able to have such a great influx.
Is that monitored then? When you talked about the training and you having to compete every 2 years. So how is that tracked, and how do you ensure that, what are the records that are kept? How do you ensure that that's kept up to date, and who enforces that?
Every section in Canada is responsible for their members. So that would be mostly every province. Every province keeps a database of who participates and monitors it. And if you come past the 2-year mark, you would get a notice, and you would be able to recertify. And if you don't recertify at that time, you'd have to start at zero and come back and take the black badge course again, and you'd lose your membership.
Tell me, is IPSC funded or sponsored by gun manufacturers?
Not as a rule. They may sponsor the nationals. They may sponsor a prize or two, but there's no direct funding to the athletes. There's prizes at international and national competitions, but not very much.
So what exemptions would you like to see written into the law, into Bill
I would
C-21?
I'd like to see Bill C-21 not take place at all, but if it is going forward as it seems it is, we would like to have IPSC added under that 97(1)(I) as equal to the Olympics and Paralympic sports.
Okay, thank you. I will say I'm not going to apologize in any way for this legislation coming forward, in spite of what my Conservative colleague said. And I would just make a comment. 75% of people who die in Canada by firearms are dying by suicide. So if there's a gun in the home, they're 5 times more likely to die. Women, my colleague Mr. Chang quoted the statistic earlier in the previous panel, 1 in 4 women in a home with a firearm are at risk. So I think we can't forget about intimate partner violence, and we can't forget about people who are dying by suicide. So I respect people talking about their sport, but I'll go back to what Dr. Colquier said earlier about it being a choice that we're making, and a choice between a hobby and people's lives. So I know I only have about 15 seconds left, Chair, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Moff. Madame Michaud, c'est à vous maintenant. 6 minutes.
You have 6 minutes, Ms. Michaud. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here. I will go back to what my colleague was saying. The whole issue of the IPSIC, and I will repeat it in French. This is a quote, is significant and worrisome, I would say, in its messaging to members. The article said that if this exemption is given, the exception that you were requesting, with the exemption with respect to the handgun freeze, you said that if this occurs, IPSIC will become the gateway for handgun ownership in Canada, and that the number of members would rise substantially. What are the reasons behind this desire to get an exemption? Is it really to continue practicing the sport, or do you simply want to be a recognized association for handguns in Canada? I heard you, Ms. Russell. I'd like to hear what you have to say on this. I know what Mr. Smith thinks. Do you think that? Do you agree with what was said in this letter, or do you think that IPSIC went too far in its messaging?
Thank you for the question. I would like to respond in my role as a coach, an instructor, and the first female instructor in Canada. To get into the sport of IPSIC is not very simple. It can take 6 to 8 months. You need a Canadian firearms safety course. You need a Canadian restricted firearms safety course. You need a restricted possession and acquisition license, an RPAL. And those holders in Canada, which number hundreds of thousands, are monitored 24/7. You need membership with a shooting range or club. You need to take the club level safety training or their new member course. You need insurance coverage. That's a federal requirement. That is mandatory. Then you proceed to take your black badge course. But as a coach, I will not have you come into this sport if attitude is an issue, regardless of your age. A junior, doesn't matter. It could be a senior or a super senior. Attitude, we ask you to leave, exit. So you have to have basic minimum skills and basic minimum equipment, the right attitude, and the willingness to learn and train. And as a coach and an instructor, we will put you through several drills, an intensive 2-day course or more, to ensure that you, first of all, meet safety, and then secondly, you are ready to compete in our sport, which, by the way, is an elongated stop sign, which is what is our paper target, and steel, which sometimes I equate to looking like a snow cone. So those are what we engage at as an athlete in our sport, and as a coach and an instructor, I ensure that people are ready to come into this sport. So it is a long process. It is not something come tout de suite. You don't get in because you decide that, oh, I want to get into this sport. No, there are lots of hoops, and steps that you must follow.
Merci, je vous entends.
Thank you. You talked about attitude, respect, safety, and I do respect that. I understand that you want to make sure that all of these values are respected in your sport. Unfortunately, there are always exceptions to the rule, and I understand that your sport is based on the fact that you're trying to represent real situations in the decor that's used, using buildings, etc. That's what we hear. And perhaps that leads people to who maybe uses training for bad purposes. Maybe I'm expressing myself poorly, but Some individuals have committed crimes. They were legal firearm owners, and they were training in shooting ranges that are recognized in Quebec, in Moncton, and elsewhere. How can we guarantee that there will never be any exceptions to the rule? I know that you uphold these values, but how can you guarantee that people will not be an exception?
What I can say on my role as an official is that we have a very, very strict no tolerance policy to safety violations. So we have a process that is followed, that if anyone is found to break a safety infraction or a rule, they will be visited by our coordinators. Our NROI, National Range Officer Institute, will review it. The instructor coaches will review the situation, as well as the match director that put on the match. Why did this happen? To answer to your question about bad people and how do you prevent that and stop that, I wish I had the answer, because then maybe I could go and try to help you as elected officials solve the world problems. Okay? We do not, again, I will repeat, we do not tolerate any form of bad behavior. We have governances in play. The organization itself has a structure that has a code of ethics, conflict of interest, gender equality, long-term athlete development, but all involved in there is the fact that safety is number one, and it is totally not tolerated if you don't follow.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you
we
off
do what
there.
we can to stop bad behavior.
Yeah. Merci, Madame.
Thank you.
Mr. McGregor, please go ahead. 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for coming here today. Your testimony is appreciated. Mr. Smith, I'd like to start with you, because what I've seen with C21 is we seem to be presented with an either-or situation when it comes to shooting disciplines in public safety, especially with the handgun freeze, i.e. that no more exemptions can be made because it's going to lead to public safety issues and so on. And I'm just wondering, in your mind, concerns have been raised about people joining IPSC just so that, if an exemption was given, they would join IPSC just so that they could go buy a handgun, and then they might forget about their membership with IPSC because they would have their handgun. I'm just wondering, do you have any thoughts on whether there's a middle road here, whether C21 could be strengthened so that there was continuous eligibility requirements written into the legislation, i.e. people had to demonstrate they're an active and ongoing participant in IPSC, just to satisfy some of the public safety concerns that are out there with the handgun freeze and so on?
So we do have the maintenance. So we presently do monitor who is shooting and if they're still active and they have to go. So I don't see any problem that in order to keep our sport in existence, if we had to do something in the regulations that monitored that, maybe the CFOs were involved. There's various, the Australian model, like they've totally banned handguns, but IPSC is still a sport there. They do a preliminary licensing where in order to introduce new people to the sport, you do 6 months under a preliminary license, and then you're fully licensed, and then you move on to a full member, and you're allowed to acquire a handgun. So, through the regulations, I think we come to some kind of term. I don't know if it needs to be written right in the bill. Some of the discussions I've had with some of the members of this committee suggested that those details be worked out at the regulation level.
And then Mr. Smith and Ms. Russell, I'd like to have both of you chime in on my next question. As has been correctly pointed out, the existence of a firearm in the house, especially with someone who's contemplating suicide, in those situations, suicides have a 90% success rate in resulting in death. So that is a very real concern. And we know, the mental health of many Canadians is a worrying thing. We've seen mental health concerns go up in this country, especially over the last couple of years. I know that the IPSC community is quite close-knit, and I've seen the camaraderie firsthand. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how your members are checking up on each other? I'm sure you've met some people who participate in the sport who have had bad days. Can you talk about, within the theme of safety, how you're checking up on each other to make sure everyone's doing okay?
Just speaking to earlier, IPSC was referred to as a hobby, and I don't really see it as a hobby. Most of the people that are shooting IPSC are fully dedicated. Some spend up to 10, 15 hours a week. They go to the range weekly. There's a lot of camaraderie, and certainly we all look after each other. If someone's, I've no instance where there's been divorce and people volunteer to take the firearms out of the house to make sure that there's no complications. The mental health issues where people intervene and make sure the person gets looked after. To my knowledge, we've never had any instance of an IPS shooter in Canada involved in any kind of suicide that I know of, and maybe I shouldn't speak to it, but we are a giant family that looks after each other. I have national friends. If I get stranded in Toronto, I put it on Facebook. I get 6 offers for a place to stay. If I'm in Vancouver, people take me to dinner. I've been to every province. It's more of a lifestyle than it is a hobby.
Russell?
Thank you for the question. You actually bring up a very good point that what we need in Canada, and of course you have the ability to see that Canadians get this, we need more money for mental health. We need more money for education. And that is where you're going to, at the grassroots level, the level that I learned in family structure, the 3 R's: respect, recognition, and responsibility. And at the same time to look out for your fellow people. So in the IPSC community, I consider them, as Jim has said, Mr. Smith has said, they are my family. So when I am also an IPSC club rep, I am responsible to put on sanctioned IPSC matches. And by the way, I don't just decide I'm going to throw on a match just like that. It involves informing my section, 30 days notice, setting it up, getting everything organized with the club, meeting the club rules, meeting the municipal rules and regulations, the provincial rules and regulations, the federal rules and regulations, before I actually can put on that sanctioned match. When I do that match, and in Ontario, our statistics show we have over 2,000 members, the attendance rate at the matches that we have held number over 10,000. At these matches, range officials like myself, I'm a chief range officer, match directors like myself, and fellow members, we look out for each other. We see that someone is not exactly in a good place, we pull them aside. There's a camaraderie. We work together. We look out for each other, and we respect each other. So yes, mental health is a very important issue in this country, and it needs more funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. McGregor. So that brings our first round of questions to an end. We'll start our second round. We have a hard stop again today, and once again, we're a little short of time for the second round. So I'm going to have to cut the time back. 5:45. So I think and we always go over because I hate cutting people off. So I'm gonna cut the time down to 4 minutes for Liberals and the Conservatives, 2 minutes for the Bloc and the NDP. And with that, we will start with Mr. Shipley for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to start with Ms. Keiko, please. First of all, thank you for being here today, and also thank you for your representation of Canada, representing our country so proudly. I can only imagine what kind of pride you must have had walking into an Olympic stadium representing your country. I'd like to start off by asking you, your father was also an Olympic pistol shooter, and you mentioned in an interview once that growing up, your father taught you a lot about the sport of pistol shooting. He stressed the importance of gun safety and responsible gun ownership. Perhaps you could tell the committee a little bit about what age you started shooting with your father and some of the lessons he taught you growing up around gun safety and how much of a family issue this was to you.
So there's two separate questions. What age did I start shooting? I was 11. What age did I start learning about gun safety? I can't tell you because it's been as long as I can remember. I was a very young kid. My dad didn't even let us point our fingers at each other and make like the pew pew sounds. Like he kind of just folded them up and said, "No, put that away. That's not safe. We don't do that in our house." My dad took gun safety very, very seriously. And I also take it very seriously. You don't aim a gun at something you don't intend to shoot. And that's ingrained in me at all times. My guns are always pointed in a safe direction, which is downrange. My kids aren't allowed to play with guns or toy guns either. And I think when it comes to gun safety, it's about respect. It's about understanding safety of all aspects and making sure that that's always safe. And gun safety was always like paramount in our house. And quite honestly, I'm like growing up, I'm like, I didn't even know where my dad had his firearms stored because they were so well secured and put away that I didn't know where they were until I was much older.
Thank you, and thank you. Sorry to interrupt you, but I only have 4 minutes, so I'm very tight on time. Because I'd like to ask you the next question very simply. If Bill C-21 is enacted as it sits presently, do you feel that would cause the end of Olympic sport that you participated in for Canada?
Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to jump to IPSEC, if I could, please. There's been some discussion today about exactly your sport, and I don't know anything about your sport. I've never seen it. There's definitely been a little bit of talk and some conflicting talk about the targets and the setup. Could someone please explain to me, and whichever one would like to from your organization, what the targets are and what the setup is?
Thank you for the question. If I may, I am, again, not only an athlete and a coach, but I'm also a club rep, and I put on the matches. As I said earlier, our target that we engage at is paper and steel. And the paper is literally an elongated stop sign. Many, many years ago when IPSEC started, it was a different target. And some people have equated it to, okay, it was humanoid looking. But it was changed when we were looking into, and the organization said, this is a sport. We are strictly engaging paper and steel. So they changed it to the elongated target, which I am very happy for because it's a sport. And again, I'm engaging at paper and steel. As far as the course design, it is an obstacle course. I can give you no other better explanation of it. It is challenging me physically and mentally as far as multitasking. If there's a problem, making sure that I can, in the shortest second, correct myself and go through that obstacle course. We call it a course of fire or stage in the fastest and most accurate time possible. It's incredible that at 62 years of age, I can still compete in this sport and tell you proudly that I have the opportunity to represent Canada because I'm in the top 25 in Ontario. And I basically got there because as people like Linda, we worked, we strived, we trained, and we worked for excellence.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have many more questions, but I know my time's up, so thank you, Chair.
We'll go now to Mr. Nur Mohammed, please, 4 minutes.
Thank you so much. And I must say that I hope that when I'm 62, I'm in a position to be in the top 25 of anything athletic, though the prospects are not good. I've been hearing a lot about the importance of what you do as a sport. And I think that's important to understand. Do you think that it's, and this is to the folks from IPSEC, do you think that people who are not engaging in sports shooting in structured environments such as yours should have guns in their homes?
Well, I've been doing this sport for 31 years. When I started, and my husband was already in the sport with it, I joined so that I could do something with my husband, travel the world, go all across Canada. And I was basically just doing target shooting. I was at a range, Stittsville ranges, where actually they have MP days of the range once a year. And I was engaging at steel, chickens and pigs. Yes.
To interrupt, sir.
Yes.
Question is really more about, you were doing this because there was some kind of sporting interest or endeavor related to it. Do you think that people that don't have that interest, who are just wanting to buy a gun because they want to have a gun at home, should be buying guns?
We do not have that right in Canada to have a firearms for self-defense. That is my understanding. A legislator could correct me if I'm wrong. In Canada, we legally own firearms for recreational shooting sports.
What I'm asking you is, if somebody is not engaging in that, they buy the gun, they say they're going to, but they don't, should they be allowed to have that gun?
If they are purchasing it for target practice and target shooting, which I would say, why not? Not everybody gets into golf to go to the Masters. They go into golf so that they can go to the range and have a recreational outlet.
Well, since we've used the golf analogy, I mean, I don't know how many people have died by legal golf clubs. So the question I want to ask you is, are you concerned about the fact that legal gun owners were responsible for the mosque shooting in Quebec, the Concordia shooting, the Dawson shooting, the Moncton shooting of 3 RCMP officers? Because those were all legal gun owners who trained at gun ranges. I mean, does that concern you?
Any loss of life, tragic, violent, concerns me. But all I can say to you is that we have in place steps to make sure that the people that join our sport as athletes are vetted, and we do not let them pass go if they do not demonstrate attitude and safety.
Okay, so take a minute to lean into that. So, I really appreciate your comments earlier about safety and making sure you're doing that check to people. Now, let's say somebody owns a gun. They've gone through your process. They come in one day to the range, and you can tell that something isn't right with them. And they go home, and something happens. Do you have any, and God forbid something terrible happens, do you have any process in place to make sure that that person then doesn't leave? Do you call law enforcement and say, hey, listen, we are concerned about a member of ours who may be leaving with a legal firearm? Is that a general practice for you? Or do you just send them away and that's it?
As a previous gentleman on this that was interviewed by you earlier today, he said that what we do is we take steps to intervene when we see that there's a situation where there's a concern, a safety concern, a health concern. We take steps to intervene. Our officials are trained. We are there. Number one, we are taught when we go through the National Range Officer Institute, we are taught that safety is number one. When you take our Black Badge course to do this sport, you are taught safety is number one. So all I can respond to is that we cannot control the fact, we as human beings cannot control the fact that there are people that have bad intentions, that will go and rent a vehicle and run it through a group of people. Okay, so you cannot control the bad things in life, but you can do what you can to make sure you regulate it within your organization and ensure that the safety is number one.
And I would submit one of those things is to have fewer guns available
Thank you,
to
Mr.
people.
Mohammed. On y va maintenant, Madame Michaud, 2 minutes.
Ms. Michaud, you have 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have another question for you, Ms. Russell. I'm trying to understand all of this, and it was said earlier that the way that the bill is currently drafted, that there's some ambiguity with respect to the handgun freeze and who is exempted, who isn't, and I understand that you wish to be exempted as an association. What would this exemption mean to you, and how would it be different if there had not been a freeze? Does that mean that any shooting range could get an exemption? Anybody who has a license could compete regardless of level of competition, or how would you determine who can compete and who cannot compete? Do you assess all of these? Do you evaluate all of these factors?
Thank you for the question. Yes, as far as getting into our sport and with the IPSC organization's request to be exempted in this legislation, what does it mean to me? It means to me that when I die, I can bequeath my firearm that my husband gave to me on my 25th anniversary to perhaps a young aspiring female that wants to excel in my sport. It means that if my equipment breaks down, I can replace it and continue to 72 or 82 as long as I am mentally and physically able and continue in this sport, because age is no bearing. Does not matter as long as you're safe. How would it have been different? Would any shooting range just apply for this? As I said earlier, there is a process to get your black badge, and it starts with getting the licensing and getting vetted and becoming a member with a club. And all these steps can take, like I said earlier, anywhere from 6 to 8 months. It is not a toot-swit quick process, okay?
Excuse me, I have to cut you off there.
Thank you.
Mr. McGregor, please, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Russell, I want to actually continue from Mr. Nur Mohammed's line of questioning, because I think what he was trying to get to was when a person, if we're going to create some exemptions here and a person wants to buy, sell, or transfer a handgun, do you believe that they should show that they need this handgun because they belong to a shooting discipline? Do you think that for the purchase of a handgun, they need to demonstrate a need rather than just saying, I like to go to my range recreationally? Because I think if we're going to arrive at a compromised position here, I think that's probably the narrow laneway we have. And furthermore, tightening up the eligibility requirements, like you have to demonstrate you're an active participant, that you are engaging in matches, some kind of recorded demonstration of the need of the handgun, rather than I just want to go buy one so I can go to the range, every couple of months.
Thank you for that question. Excellent point. And yes, we do need to dialogue with this committee at the point where you are going to review the regulations and any amendments such as what we are requesting. And yes, we need to put steps into play, because again, the IPSC organization already has steps in play to make sure that that athlete is where they need to be at the right place and the right time. So as far as this legislation, yes, we need to dialogue. We need to put steps into place. Something like a graduated licensing system. You can't, and you can't, you have to, you crawl, you walk, and then you can run. So basically steps to ensure that this is followed and that the person is safe to compete with a firearm in a sport, in recreational shooting in Canada.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. 5 seconds left. Thank you, I appreciate it. So that brings our meeting to a close. I would like to thank all the witnesses for sharing with us their time and expertise and concern. It's a difficult subject, and you have helped us with our study today. And thank you to all the members of the committee, and with that, we are now adjourned.